Hi, everybody. Welcome. We are excited to have you here. And we will get started in a few minutes. Let people join, and we still have a couple minutes left, so we'll give everybody a few minutes. Is there somebody from Tucson Braver Angels that wants to do a little intro before we get started? Nervaire? Yes? Okay. No, did I say that correctly?
You did. Very,
Excellent.
very well done.
Awesome. Awesome. Awesome.
I'll answer to anything, but it's great yeah, thank you for that.
Absolutely. Yeah, so hopefully Nolan's partner in crime, Stephen Henderson, will be joining us. He's unfortunately dealing with a pretty serious cancer diagnosis for his mother. And so he can usually make our virtual sessions, but if he's a little bit late, we understand why. And we will get started anyway. So yeah, we'll just wait another minute or two, and then we'll jump into the program.
Hello, Mark and Nevere.
Hi, Ted.
The Arizona team here, Martin.
Yeah, and Ed is here. Some of the rest, and
Hi.
Nadine, some of the regular are here, and a lot of new faces.
See my face.
All right. So I'll ask anybody who's not presenting to mute their microphone so we don't have a lot of feedback. And we'll get started in just a second. Please make use of the chat to ask questions as we go through. And I facilitate the session, so I'll weave them into the presentation. But Nervaire, why don't you start by introducing Tucson Braver Angels, and then we can get started with our program.
Okay. Tucson Braver Angels, the Tucson Alliance, Braver Angels Tucson Alliance, formed about a year ago. We've only met on Zoom and are looking forward to when we can actually meet in person. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, we're so glad you've come, and we invite you to be a part of this work. Although we've called ourselves the Tucson Alliance with the hope that we can begin meeting in person before long. As long as we're online, we welcome you to join us from wherever you are geographically, and have extended our invitation to the whole state this time, and anticipate doing that moving forward as well. So we invite you to consider yourself a part of our extended Braver Angels Arizona Alliance. And tonight we welcome Nolan, Finley, and Stephen Henderson, who are journalists from Detroit, who have founded the Civility Project. The Civility Project has many goals in common with the Braver Angels, and we invite you to learn more about Braver Angels and the Civility Project by visiting our websites. Mr. Finley and Stephen Henderson are longtime friends despite their different perspectives on almost everything. The one thing they agree on is the importance of their friendship, which includes a healthy dose of disagreement and mutual respect. Mr. Finley is an editor at the Detroit News, and in 2012 he was inducted into the Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame. Together with Mr. Henderson, he hosts One Detroit on Detroit Public Television. In 2014, the National Association of Black Journalists named Stephen Henderson the Journalist of the Year while he was writing for the Detroit Free Press. And in 2014, he also was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for commentary. In addition to his role as host on One Detroit with Mr. Finley, Mr. Henderson also hosts American Black Journal and Detroit Today on Detroit Public Television. Together, they meet with civic groups and companies all over the United States in person and in Zoom meetings like this one to teach us how to listen and engage with each other in conversation, not competition, even when we disagree, to maintain curiosity as well as respect for each other's humanity. So to Nolan Finley and Stephen Henderson, when you do arrive, thank you for taking time to join us tonight across a few time zones. I know it's a little later there. And also, Lynn, I didn't have your information, so I
That's
haven't
okay.
introduced you, but thank you for being here as well.
Yes.
And we extend you a warm welcome and look forward to learning from you this evening.
Thank you so much. I serve as the executive director for the Civility Project, so helping these guys out to make everything happen. I'm going to share the screen for a moment to share with you two videos, one from one of our sponsors. We do these programs thanks to the generosity of sponsorship from Delta Dental and Huntington Bank. And so we do have a quick little sponsor video from Delta Dental, and then I would like to play for you a sizzle reel of Stephen and Nolan, since Stephen isn't here yet, so we want you at least to see him, and then Nolan will dive into the program. So bear with me while I share my screen.
We are living in challenging times. Politics is polarizing. Racism is rampant. The pandemic is frightening, and families are divided. Tough times require more dialogue and more understanding. But navigating our differences constructively is hard work. Delta Dental believes that healthy, smart, vibrant communities are also civil and harmonious. They are places where disagreement does not have to be toxic or destructive. Civility starts with listening. Welcome to the Civility Project.
And just bear with me while I share one more with you, and then we will get started.
There's been so much over the last couple of years, this notion that we can't talk to each other. I believe we can talk to each other.
I'm the first person to say, this is not easy.
Look at the way our media has become bunkered on the cable news channels, on the internet. You're all conservative, you're all liberal. They don't talk across lines, they fight.
And to say, well, this is somehow
You can't
inappropriate.
shut down thoughts.
Hold on, it's not about
I mean,
shutting down
hang on,
thoughts.
I don't know. She's not saying shut down. She said
But how do you know that's not what they're going to do?
You say,
I don't just think it's President Trump. I think it's the environment has become toxic, and if you're not on the attack, you get eaten.
When they sat down together and talked about the work they did to have a friendship, I'm like, how in the world?
both of us have been made better in the work that we do by the relationship we've been able to build with, it's tense at times. Sometimes it is uncivil. You see it on TV.
Even among political commentators, if you will, and opinion journalists, there isn't that much interaction today. There's not that comfort level for people to have good, healthy debates and discussions.
The sort of key word for this project is the ability to sit and listen to somebody else, listen to someone else's story, and listen in a way that really respects what they're saying as opposed to anticipating what you might say in response.
All right, thank you for indulging that. Nolan, would you like to start by just introducing the Civility Project, how it came to be?
Yeah, why don't, we're going to do things by necessity a little differently tonight. But thanks, Lynn, and thanks to Braver Angels. We're glad to be with you tonight. And I hope Steve is able to join us. As Lynn said, he's dealing with family emergency. But if not, we're going to talk about the Civility Project. And I'd really love to hear about the the Braver Angels organization, because it sounds very similar. The mission, I just looked at your website before our meeting tonight, before we got together tonight, and your mission sounds very similar to our mission. And so it's very excited to learn about you. And I hope to hear, I hope we can, since I I'm just looking to see, there's 20 of us together tonight. Maybe we can be a little more intimate and have a little back and forth conversation. You can tell me about what you all are doing and hope to accomplish. And I'll tell you about the Civility project, and maybe we can, have some questions and conversation back and forth. But let me talk to you about the Civility project first. As Lynn said, and as you saw from that sizzle reel, I am a conservative. I'm the conservative editorial page editor of the Detroit News. Detroit is a town with two newspapers. The Detroit News is the conservative paper, and the Detroit Free Press is the liberal newspaper. And Steve Henderson, I met Steve when he came to Detroit, came back to Detroit. He's a native, but he went off, worked at other papers. Anyway, in about 2011, 2012, he came back to Detroit to be the editorial page of that paper, and as a progressive. And naturally, people thought it would be fun to put us together and watch us fight. So we did a lot of TV shows together. We did a lot of radio shows, and you saw clips from some of our appearances. We got after each other pretty fiercely, and we have very, very deep disagreements. This is not, we're not, he and I are, sort of playing around the center with each other. These are deep disagreements that we have, and and we, like I said, they can express themselves in very loud and seemingly angry ways. And so, we started doing that when Steve came back to Detroit. We did it for a while, and we came to realize something that, and that was that, despite the sort of oftentimes ferocity of our disagreement in our public appearances, and our real disagreement on most issues, he and I, had developed a great fondness for each other. We became very close friends despite our political differences. And at the start, we didn't think there's anything unusual about that. Again, this was back in 2013, 2014, that it's 10 years ago or more. And at that time, it didn't seem that unusual that he and I could have these political differences and philosophical disagreements, and still remain close friends and talk about these issues. We weren't avoiding the issues. Obviously, we couldn't, because we had public positions, and we had to defend them. And so it didn't strike us as all that odd, but it seemed to strike everyone else as odd. And we got a lot of questions about, is this real? Is this friendship real? How can you do this? And a lot of people, for a little, we felt a little bit like Romeo and Juliet for a little while, because it angered a lot of people. My friends and his friends, it angered them that we were close and that we didn't hold our disagreements against each other. So we started thinking about this when it became, when it became apparent that this was not the usual thing, and this was not a typical thing in the era we were living in. And so we started out, we both, one of the things that we did have in common is we both love bourbon whiskey, and we drank a whole lot of it back then. I think we both slowed down quite a bit since, but we got the idea to bring groups of our friends, groups of people on our side of the political divide together in monthly bourbon nights. We started out with about 20 people, almost equally divided between conservative and progressive. And the only thing we ask is that they came and talked to each other, but not necessarily about politics, that they came and talked to each other about who they were and why they felt the things they felt, to talk about who they were as people. And these things grew and grew and grew, and eventually evolved into the more formal Civility Project. And what we do is go around and talk to folks in Michigan and elsewhere about our friendship and the things that we have learned to do to maintain a relationship across the political divide. And so that became that's how the Civility Project came to be. We're fortunate to have some local sponsors who have allowed us to formalize it and take it on the road, if you will. But it's something we're very passionate about because we do believe, obviously, I mean, there's too much division in America, but beyond that, I mean, political divisions have never been that unusual a thing in our country. I mean, our system sort of thrives on dissent and we healthy disagreements. But we've noticed over the last several years, and what concerns us, I'm sure you all have noticed too, or you wouldn't be in the organization you're in, is that this disagreement has become a very dangerous thing. It's become hatred, and we no longer just disagree with each other. We hate each other because we disagree with each other. And I often think of the quote from Martin Luther King, who said, we hate each other because we don't know each other, and we don't know each other because we don't talk to each other. And that's exactly the situation we're in today, some 50 years after he said that, 45 years after he said that. We don't talk to each other, and we make assumptions about each other. And the core belief at the Civility Project is that all good people come to their opinions in the same way. We all take the facts, the information, the data that's available to us, and we run them through the filters of our own values and experiences. And that's how we form our opinions. And if my opinion's different than yours, if your opinion's different than mine, it doesn't make either one of us stupid or evil or sinister in any way. It just means we've had different experiences in life, and we hold perhaps different values that inform our opinions. And the goal of the Civility Project is to get people to understand what those experiences are and what those values are before they start talking politics, before they start judging people based on their political viewpoints. And because we believe that if you take the time to find out who a person is and why they think the things they do based on their life experiences, their values, where they come from, that you build a level of respect that is necessary for civil conversations. And so, that's what we try to do when we go out to talk to a group. Not all groups are like-minded. Many of the groups we speak to, have had conflicts amongst themselves. We've talked to school boards and members of communities that, are just having trouble communicating because they so disagree with each other, and they've made a lot of negative assumptions about each other. And we believe it's those assumptions we make, those uninformed assumptions about how we feel about someone based on how they, feel about their politics, is what leads to this, what seems to be a, irreparable divide in our country. We don't think it's irreparable. We believe that if people would talk to each other and listen to each other and build that level of respect, we can have meaningful discourse in this country. We're not suggesting that, we're not out to change anybody's opinions. We want people to continue to hold their opinions, and we're very comfortable with that. I don't try to convert Steve. He's never tried to convert me. It wouldn't do either one of us any good. I'm never going to make him see the light. And, he's never going to bring me over to the dark side. So, that's how we approach this. But we managed to have very productive conversations without trying to win a conversation or not try to convert. We're trying to discuss ideas and gain some value from that discussion. And we do gain value from taking the time to listen to each other and to explore the differences in our opinion. It helps us shape our own views, and sometimes we learn something we didn't know. And isn't that the point of having a conversation? We think folks can do this if they're committed to it. And we have some tips that we can talk about later, but I'd like to hear from some of you all
Yeah, so Nolan, we have
later.
questions. I'm going to
Mhm.
start with one that was sent to me privately.
Yeah.
So there's at least 3 questions that I'm going to lob your way, and then we can get into some of those tips as well. I
Mhm.
also want to put in a plug for our first ever all-day civility program, which is in person in
Yeah.
Detroit, which is a little far for you guys, but it's May 20th, and there will be live streaming. So you can go to our website, and I'll put that link in the chat in a moment. If you wanted to stream it and take part, it's really a great roster of speakers. And so that's very exciting. That's how the program has expanded. So, Nolan, the first question that I have is how do you keep things civil when there's a deep disagreement about what constitutes a fact? How do you handle a conversation if one party sees the arguments of the other as misinformation or outright lies? Telling honestly what one thinks may lead to quite some conflict. Not saying anything is similarly unsatisfying. What are your strategies here?
And who'd that question come from so we can?
Well, it was a private one, so
Okay, all right,
yeah.
that's fine. We get
Yep.
that conversation a lot. It's one of our most frequent conversations. And,
Yep.
Facts are, a funny thing. What's a fact today may not be a fact tomorrow. One of the things we urge people to do if they're going to enter a conversation with the goal of having civil discourse is leave your self-righteousness at the door. One of my mentors in life, one of my dear friends, was a Democratic congressman named John Dingell. He served longer in the House than anybody else, and he served long enough so that both conservatives and liberals, were on his back all the time. And he said to me once when the environmentalists were giving him hell over his defense of the auto industry that, in frustration, he said, they think they're the only ones who talk to God. And that has stuck with me all these years. The person on the other side of the conversation who you feel is spreading misinformation is just as convinced you're wrong and that you're spreading information as you are, as you are that they are. So, we urge people to lose the smugness, consider why people are saying what they're saying, and learn from the conversation. And again, it's important to set realistic goals. What's your goal in this conversation? Do you want to learn why that person thinks the way they do, why they think this is a fact and that this information is true? Or are you out to convert and convince them? Because if it's the latter, there's no point even having the conversation. You're not going to dissuade them, but you might be able to present your argument if you keep the tone down and if you're less judgmental, and if you don't start out by pointing and saying, wow, that's not true, that's not a fact. So, there's ways to go about this. And I see my very lovely partner has joined us.
Hey,
Can you hear us, Steve?
Welcome. Glad you're here. Can he
I
hear
think
us?
he's on mute.
Stephen, can you hear us?
Yeah, sorry.
Cool. Welcome. So glad you made it. We're just answering a question about how do we deal with having conversations when the other person provides information that may not be factual, or how do we determine facts? And so Nolan was answering it. I don't know if you want to chime in before we ask more questions.
I'll trust that Nolan answered that effectively.
We'll start from here then. And Steve, this very interesting group we're talking with tonight, the Braver Angels, their mission is just like ours. I mean, it's almost identical to ours. They bring liberals and conservatives, Republican, Democrats together in this chapters all over the country to have civil discourse, not to try to convert each other, but to have civil discourse and explore ideas in a productive way. And I've been anxious to hear from them about their group and their motivation, because I hadn't heard of this before, and it's very exciting to learn about it.
Yeah.
So we have a bunch of questions. Want me to just dive into the next one? You guys?
Yeah.
Okay, so this question from Nervair says, I've recently seen a few articles questioning the value of focusing on civility with concern that it somehow dilutes the impact of the issues or causes we're passionate about. Could you respond to these concerns and your own experience with maintaining your own passionate beliefs while engaging in civil conversations?
Yeah, no, I can start talking about that. One of the things that we say all the time about civility is that, this is not some sort of kumbaya, everybody come together and agree to emerge agreeing. I know you guys are not in Michigan, but if you were and you saw Nolan and I on television together.
They just did.
Oh, they did? Oh.
Yeah, they saw our sizzle reel.
Oh, they saw the sizzle reel.
Was it pretty?
Yeah, well, it's often not pretty. And that's kind of the point. I mean, we don't kind of back down from each other, and we don't suppress our own beliefs in order to get along. I think what we've come to is the idea that there is value in spirited and meaningful exchange that both of us draw out of that interaction. And it doesn't require either of us to back down. It doesn't require either of us to say, I'm wrong or he's wrong. It requires both of us to say, look, we don't agree on this, but there's something to be gained from having interaction with somebody who sees the world differently, and we do. I mean, we see the world most fundamentally differently. If anything, I think both of us would say that we probably sharpen our own positions to some extent by talking with each other, right? Like hearing an opposite and equally spirited view, I think helps each of us think more deeply about what we're talking about, think differently about things, and know more about the subject by knowing what the other person thinks. And in addition, there's just not this, you don't walk away thinking, oh, I won or I lost. We kind of take that out of the equation and say that I'm walking away with a better understanding of where somebody else is coming from. I'm walking away with a better understanding of how passionate that person is, and we may not agree, but we haven't debased or devalued each other in a way that destroys the ability to talk again.
So people are wondering if you might give some examples of the disagreements that you guys have had and how you addressed differences in stance or perspective. If you could give an example or two.
Pick an issue.
Yeah.
Pick an issue, because there's very few issues we agree on in terms of the things the country is debating about today. We're debating those same issues. I mean, whether it's race or election integrity or inflation or the economy or how to approach COVID. We disagree on all of that. And, every once in a while we stumble across an issue we agree on, but, we try to avoid that whenever possible. But, you pick an issue, we disagree, but we do agree it's important that we have the conversation about them. And one thing we do agree on, I believe, is that we both want to get to the same place on most issues. We both want this to be a better world, a better community for our children. We want people to be treated more fairly. We want more prosperous communities. We want to get to the same place. We just have different ideas for how to get there. And so once you understand that, it does make the debate about the approaches a little more productive and a little less frustrating, perhaps.
I just like to see you prototype a discussion like that. So you're dealing with the process, and you know what are one or two of the most disturbing differences that you have had, and just tell us about how you might go through a discussion on that topic.
Well, let's take
Nolan, because I'm just going to say that Martin gave some suggestions in the chat. If you'd like to pull from those,
Martin.
He's one of the participants. He said,
okay, what did he suggest?
He said the statement "universal health care is socialism" or "the election was stolen" are those issues you discussed. He was wondering.
At various times. I mean, I don't think either one of us thinks the election was stolen. Well, I think we have different views on why people might think that.
I think the election thing is a good example. I mean, so in Detroit, where both of us work, was kind of ground zero for the dispute about elections and voting in November of 2020. That night, election night, when the votes were being counted in the city of Detroit, a bunch of people from the suburbs, white Republicans, came down to the place where the votes were being counted. Basically, try to get inside and stop the counting, claiming that there was some sort of fraud going on. They tried to prevent some of the certifications of the vote from happening. And while neither one of us, I think, was on the side of those people, we had real disagreements about what was actually happening and what needs to be done about it. So I believe really firmly that the questioning of voting, not just in November of 2020, but overall, is itself a huge fraud. It is driven by fear, mostly by white constituencies, of the growing number of Black and brown people who are actually exercising the right to vote. There's not a shred of evidence anywhere that there is election fraud. There wasn't in Detroit. There wasn't in Milwaukee or Chicago or New York or any of these places that they targeted. And I think the proof that this is about race is in the list of places where the vote's being questioned. Nobody went to Birmingham, which is a wealthy, mostly white suburb of Detroit, in November of 2020 to question whether there was election fraud going on there. And in fact, Birmingham flipped from 2016 to 2020. More people voted for Joe Biden than Donald Trump in Birmingham in 2020, and Donald Trump had carried Birmingham in 2016. He beat Hillary Clinton, but nobody questioned whether that was a place where there was fraud. In fact, in the city of Detroit, Donald Trump got more votes in 2020 than he had in 2016, largely thanks to immigrants from the Middle East who live in the city, who were largely single issue voters, but preferred Donald Trump over Joe Biden. They showed up in larger numbers and voted for him. But the questioning of the vote was in Detroit, where you were questioning African American votes for the most part, right? Overwhelming majority of the population. I don't think Nolan would agree with, probably 50% of what I just said.
That's probably right.
Even though
they questioned it in Antrim County too, which is
they did. That's true.
all white, northern Michigan, rural county.
Right.
I think our differences on this issue is not whether the election was stolen. I don't believe it was. I never did from the start, but I have talked to a lot of people who do, people from all walks of life, and you shouldn't make any assumptions about who these people are, who believe the election somehow was stolen. I don't agree with them, but I understand why they might think that way. I mean, they watched for 4 years a relentless attack, a relentless undermining on the president. They were very passionate about it. Now, I am not passionate about Donald Trump. I opposed Donald Trump from the beginning. I was one of the few conservatives, who did so at that time, and I remained opposed to him throughout his presidency on basis of character and other issues. And that's cost me a whole lot because people had certain expectations of me. But anyway, I talked to the folks who felt that way, and they had watched for 4 years as Democrats pursued this by any means necessary effort to get rid of Donald Trump. Started talking about impeaching Donald Trump before he even got to office. Did push this false narrative on Russian collusion that marginalized his presidency. Now, is Trump a sympathetic figure in this? No, but these people loved him, believed in him, his supporters, as passionate about this president as about any president I've ever seen a group of people be passionate about. And so it was easy for them. It was easy for him to plant that seed with them because, they saw Democrats do just about everything that could be done to get him out of office. Why wouldn't they believe they would do this? And, the alignment of that and the COVID pandemic and the changes it necessitated in voting practices became very suspicious to them. And I think one of the more frustrating disagreements in our country is over voting integrity laws. I think there are things that Republicans and Democrats could come together on, but we just had a Democratic governor veto a measure to clean up the voting rolls, to get dead people and people who moved out of state off the rolls. That's not suppression, has nothing to do, there was nothing in there that would even suggest suppression or limiting people's ability to vote. It was a simple clerical measure to clean up the voting rolls. And she vetoed it because she said, well, it costs too much money to do. And, it's that sort of thing that erodes confidence. And I believe we've done a lot over the last few years to erode confidence in the election system. And I think one thing we would agree on is that's a very dangerous development in our nation.
Yeah, we would agree on that. We wouldn't agree that there's good reason to doubt that elections are conducted fairly. I mean, most of the changes that have taken place to voting, especially in the last decade, are about expanding the franchise, making it easier for people who have not cast their votes for such a long time for reasons that have to do with exclusion, purposeful exclusion, to actually show up and vote. I think the voter integrity narrative and movement is a solution looking for a problem. And it is convened around, I believe, that fear about, the expansion of the franchise. This is a country that has, for most of its existence, maintained a power structure that left a lot of people out and behind. They did it through voting. I tell this story all the time about my father, who was born in 1933 in Mississippi, who grows up, joins the Air Force and serves in the Korean War, and comes home to a Mississippi as a veteran who cannot vote. He cannot vote in his home state. He doesn't become eligible to cast a vote in his home state until he's 36. I mean, it's a mind-boggling reality, and to pretend that the forces that prevented him from voting, which only legally fell in 1965, are not also behind all of this fretting about quote unquote fraud. Now, I think it's naive, and it's cynically naive in some cases. That's exactly what this is about. And so, I mean, and again, Nolan would not agree with that assessment.
No, because I would say that as we enter this new era of voting, we have to make changes in how we protect the vote. I mean, electronic voting, absentee voting, voting in ways other than coming to the polls, demand a new regulatory scheme. And, you know, you look at what happened in Texas and what happened in Georgia, and everybody hollered and said, oh, that's voter suppression, voter suppression. First election after those laws went in place, lines were shorter, turnout higher, even among minority voters, even among
Lines were not shorter in Georgia. They were not.
They
were
certainly
much
were,
longer.
Steve. They were shorter in both places that first election out.
Okay, so in Georgia, they closed polling places all over urban areas.
But they opened access.
Lines.
They opened access for longer voting periods and more days.
Right, but people waited in line for like 10 hours to vote on election.
Not in that first election. They didn't, Steve. I mean, these changes worked.
In 2020?
And, you know, I'm not a great believer that there's a whole lot of voter fraud going on, but I think any voter fraud we should take steps to prevent. Some elections are decided by 1 or 2 votes. And so, you know, I do think, again, this ought to be an issue we can find some common ground on and some sensible legislation on.
So we do have some questions, and I know Andrea raised her hand, but I do want to just mention really quickly, because David just said, so basically you're saying just agreeing to disagree. Is that a fair assessment, or do you think that what we're trying to present is a little bit deeper than that?
Well, we don't disagree. I mean, I guess you could call it that. I mean, we're not here trying to convince each other, but, you know, I find Steve's story about his father very productive in understanding where his position is coming from. And so that's, you know, that's what we're trying to get at. We're not ever going to convince each other, and we feel okay with that.
Sure. So, so I did have a question that was sent just to me about, you know, one of the things that people were eager to hear tonight was how they can practically start to have these meaningful conversations with people from different perspectives and different political stances in their own lives. And so I think it would be great for you guys to offer some of the tips and tactics that you usually recommend so that people can leave this call and put that into action in their lives. So what are some of the keys that you think people can take away as, you know, sort of a first step?
Well, I started, you know, the conversation tonight talking about the key one, and that's, you know, doing this basic step of getting to know each other, learning where positions come from, what the other person's experiences are and values are. And Steve and I had that conversation and did that exercise on something he set up through, you know, a program called StoryCorps that's part of National Public Radio, and Steve does a NPR radio show, and I'll let him tell you about our StoryCorps experience.
Yeah, so for those of you who aren't familiar with StoryCorps, and I know Lynn will post the link in the chat. Also, I posted a link in a chat to an NPR story about the long voting lines in Georgia in 2020 to make the point that I was making to Nolan earlier.
Listen, at some point. Are you back now, Stephen? Okay, good.
Right, just to show that, yeah, no, sometimes we really do fundamentally disagree and no one backs down. But when StoryCorps came to Detroit in 2017, the StoryCorps is trying to collect American stories, really about relationships. And you know, you sign up and go down to this Winnebago that they travel the country in, and it's like a mobile studio. And you sit with this person you've brought and talk about the relationship that you have. And most people take family members or spouses or people like that. But when StoryCorps came to Detroit, I said I wanted to take Nolan with me down there, and that we should sit in there for an hour and talk. And I told them that what I wanted us to talk about was not what we just were doing, which was talking about a subject that we disagree on and arguing. But I wanted us to tell each other our stories. I wanted him to explain to me why he's a conservative. What are the things that shape his sensibility, that say to him that the best way to solve problems is through conservative solutions. What are the experiences that he had that led him to that position? And then I wanted him to listen to me talk about the same story on the opposite side. What makes me a liberal or a progressive or whatever label you want to put on it? What are the things that happened to me, and that I learned, that taught me that the right way to solve problems is through liberal solutions. And so we did that and sat there for an hour talking just about those things. And I think a couple things happened as a result. One was that we knew a lot more, I think, about each other and understood each other's positions a lot better. We've been friends for almost a decade at that point. We've been working together on TV and other places for a long time, and had already come to a place where I think we were able to have disagreement, to have really intense conversations and arguments, and not get mad at each other or come to blows or anything like that. But I think our ability to do that was really enhanced by that knowledge. And I think the arguments between us are very different now, on the other side of that conversation. So that happened. One of the other things that happened, though, I think, is that we were able to identify, both of us, things that we had in common that we didn't know, experiences that we'd had in common, things about our histories that, even though they might not look exactly the same, share common aspirations and things like that. And that also, I think, gave both of us more empathy toward the other's positions, and again, more understanding that even though we disagree, we're not always on opposite sides of the solutions. We believe that we get to the end differently, and would take different paths, but that it became clearer, I think, that both of us really do want the same things. We just really disagree about how to get there. And so that's been a big part of the Civility project, is encouraging other people to do that same thing, and to imagine what it would be like if you did that up front, if you did that before you sat down to have an argument with somebody about politics or policy or culture. If you actually knew more about who they were and why they believe the things they believe, where do they get what they're saying, I think it makes it a lot easier to have, again, a civil disagreement rather than an uncivil one.
And it sounds simple, but most people don't do it. We did this session. One of the first sessions we did was for a large the local Chamber of Commerce put together, and they took like 80 people, 40 on one side, 40 on the other. Some people who knew each other, some didn't. And, they had them talk this out the way Steve just described. And, at the end, we interviewed some of them, and there were two ladies, two women who were neighbors. 7 years they had been neighbors, and they walked together every morning. And they knew one was a Republican, one was a Democrat, but they never talked politics and they never talked the why of it. And they had made a lot of assumptions about each other because they had never talked. And so they sat down and did this. And when they come to us, when they came back to talk to us and tell their story and what they got out of this session, they said, now we understand. Now we know why this person voted the way they did, and I voted the way I did. We don't necessarily agree. We didn't reach any kind of consensus, but we dropped our assumptions. And, that's key. We assume things about people. And, if you're going to do this, you have to lose your assumptions. I already said in the beginning, you have to lose your smugness, your self-righteousness. You have to find value in the conversation and set honest goals. What do you want to get out of it? Why is it important for you to have this conversation? And what are your honest goals? What do you hope to learn? Those are all key steps, we take. And, and then Steve, listening, right?
Yeah, listening. When we talk about kind of the core principles of civil conversations, one is, of course, lowering your expectations going into conversations, not thinking that you're going to win and maybe humiliate the other person or beat them down to the point where they come to your side, understanding that, hey, there's a value in this exchange itself, and it's not about winning or losing. Knowing more about the person you're talking to, where they're coming from, but also this idea of listening and how we listen. And I guess we use that word a little differently at the Civility Project than I think most of us use in our everyday lives. I mean, I think for a lot of us, the idea of listening means just not talking, right? Giving the other person a chance to talk without interrupting, and letting them have their say. And that is part of listening, yes. And it's an important part, but it's not really the kind of listening we're talking about. So sometimes when Nolan is talking, instead of really listening, I'm sitting there thinking about what I just said to him before he started talking, right? And wondering if he actually even heard what I said, because he's still saying something that I think is crazy or nonsensical or whatever, which means I'm not really listening to what he's saying. I'm in my own head about my own ideas. Or maybe I'm sitting there and thinking, well, as soon as he stops talking, here's what I'm going to say back. I have more that I want to say, and I'm just being polite to let him finish. Or I'm judging what he's saying, and not really listening to try to understand, why is he saying this? Why does he believe this? And is there something in what he's saying that I could learn from, even though I might not ultimately disagree? And that's the kind of listening that I think we're talking about at the Civility Project. And I have two pretty good tests, I think, for myself to determine whether I'm doing that kind of listening. One is when Nolan or somebody else is done talking, could I repeat back what they said? Not word for word, of course, but could I repeat the argument that he made in good faith and really represent what he was trying to say, from his chair, from his side of things, which is really hard to do, actually, and that takes an intense and particular kind of listening. The other test I have is what questions do I have for the person I'm talking to after they're done talking? I think when I'm really listening to somebody, I want to know more about what they're saying. I want to know, I want to know more about the particular points they're making. Often I'll find myself saying, hey, you said this in the middle of what you were talking about, and maybe I don't quite understand that, or tell me where you got that, or tell me where I can know more about that, because that's kind of interesting and I hadn't heard it before. If I'm doing that, then I feel like, yeah, no, I am listening. I am really investing in the idea that this person has some value in helping me to understand the issue better. Great example of this today on the radio show that I host. We were talking about abortion rights, which, of course, we're going to get a ruling from the Supreme Court in late June that a lot of people believe will either overturn Roe v. Wade or really reframe it in significant ways. And we were talking about what that would mean here in Michigan. And I opened up the phones and asked people to call and talk not just about whether they're in favor of abortion rights or against, but to talk about the personal experiences they had with reproductive rights. If you think about that issue, we often frame it in political and cultural or religious terms. We forget that for most of us, these are very personal family decisions and experiences. And I wanted to hear more of those. And we heard from people who were in favor of abortion rights, people who were kind of neutral on the political question, but had an experience with the issue. And we heard from people who were just dead against it. I try not to favor one side or another too much in our conversations. I'm going to try to get everybody in. But I was also really curious about, hey, tell me more about that. You said this, or you believe that. Tell me why. Where'd you get that? Tell me more about this experience that you had. And it led to a much richer conversation than I think I would have had if I had said, just tell me if you're against or for abortion rights, right? If you set it up as, a not listening exercise, you get a very raw and visceral conversation. I think we had a more well-rounded one because I was not just listening myself, but encouraging the listeners to listen to each other and, to place a value on what the other people's experiences were that led them to believe the things that they do.
So I just want to ask you guys, and this dovetails with the question in the chat. So when you start having these conversations, choosing who to have them with, I think is one thing that really gets people stuck. You don't go up to someone on the street and say, what are your political stances? It's like really looking at family or friends or relatives, neighbors. So I'd love for you guys to chime in about that. But at the same time, there's a question here about families who have similar lived experiences, but come to very different political and social beliefs. And so you're tell us about your personal experiences that lead you to have this stance. And so what about in that situation, if it's, a cousin, an uncle, whomever, who have similar shared experiences, but have different stances?
Well, nobody's a clone. So we know that sisters, brothers, siblings can turn out vastly different, raised same way, same parents, almost identical life experiences, but there's something different in their experiences and the values they formed along the way. So, it's most common. These sort of breaks are most common and most distressing amongst families. And I think both Steve and I have plenty of experience that in our own families. But I would get that back to the first part of that question about who you have this with. Obviously, there's appropriate places to have this, and there's appropriate situations to have this. But don't assume there are people you can't have it with because you feel so much about that person. Steve and I, many years ago, were at a Republican convention in northern Michigan. And of course, Steve was a little out of place there, to say the least. But we were in a bar late and drinking, and I got up from my spot and walked away. And these two women just pounced on me. They'd been watching us apparently all evening, and I knew the ladies, and very, very conservative, very deep red Republicans. And they said, we're so shocked to see you sitting there talking with him. How could you be friends with him? He's so awful. And we just hate him. And those words, we just hate him, really hit me, you know? And I asked him, I said, do you know him? No, we've never talked to him. I said, you know, that just seemed ludicrous to me that you can hate somebody you never met, never talked to. I said, well, do me a favor, go over there and talk to him for a little bit while I, you know, use the restroom, whatever. They sat down next to him for an hour and a half and talked with him. And I don't know what they were saying. I wasn't part of the conversation, but they did talk with him. And when they walked away, they came up to me and said, oh, we just love him. He's wonderful. Now, nothing about Steve had changed in terms of his politics. Nothing about them had changed in terms of the politics, but they'd taken the time to talk to him as a person, not as a political viewpoint. And it changed their attitudes and, you know, how they felt about him personally. And I think that's the goal here. That's what you're after. So I wouldn't assume there's anybody you can't have this discussion with, these kind of discussions with, if you enter them honestly.
Actually, it's funny that you say that's the goal, Nolan, because Peggy just asked a question in the chat. She said, is the goal to generate more empathy? So what is the goal of having these civil conversations and building civility?
Well, and I'll let Steve chime in because I've been dominating you, but my goal, and I think, you know, we've expressed that as part of this goal, is to bring down the hate levels in this country. Because if we don't talk to each other, even if we never reach agreement, if we don't talk to each other, this is going to become even more explosive. And we're headed for a very bad place because, you know, this inability to, as we said in the beginning, this inability to talk to each other, this refusal to talk to each other does lead to hate. And hate leads to dehumanization. And that leads to very, very ugly places, as we've seen in both this country and abroad. And, you know, we don't want to get there. We do not want to get there in this country. And yet we're headed full speed toward that. And so that's why you do it.
Yeah. And it's empathy of a stripe, I think, you know, understanding more about the idea that other people aren't evil or stupid just because they have different you know, ideas about things, that there are legitimate reasons that people come to different conclusions, and that doesn't mean you have to write them off entirely. It doesn't mean you can't learn from them. You know, I think Nolan and I would also say that there is a, you know, this intellectual value in being able to do this, that you know, both of us are you know, professional opinionators of a sort, and that our own opinions often, I think, are sharpened by our understanding of each other's approach to things. In other words, because I can listen to Nolan and really hear what he's saying, I feel like a lot of times I'm better able to articulate my own point of view because I'm accounting for him. I'm accounting for what he said or some dimension of it that he's been thinking about that maybe I wasn't. You know, there is this strengthening, I think, of your own views that comes from an actual and healthy exchange with somebody who sees it differently.
So we have another question from Brooks, and he says, why isn't at least part of the goal finding commonalities that could lead to some areas of compromise?
Oh, and that is, we don't want to suggest it's not. I know we stress that idea that you're not going to convert each other, but you don't get to consensus unless you talk. And it, you know, it certainly is part of the goal, and it certainly is part of the process, particularly in a formal setting. You know, Steve and I believe in consensus, and you know, it used to be the goal of our politics, and it's not so much anymore. So we don't want to suggest that, you know, consensus isn't a goal of this or isn't a positive outcome of this, but you can have meaningful conversations without ever reaching consensus, and that's sort of what we were trying to express.
It's also a question of what's the alternative.
Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot about what happened on January 6th last year in Washington, when you had this, group of Americans who decided that, things had gone so wrong in the election that they were going to attack the Capitol and stop the process of certifying the vote. And so they did. And I don't think you had to be a Biden supporter or a Democrat or a Republican or a Trump. I don't think your political affiliation determined how you felt about that. I think anybody who values the idea of the republic that we all belong to, I think, had to be pretty horrified by it and scared, right? Scared not just that they might have been successful, but that you had a group of Americans that large who'd gone that far outside the realm of the process of democracy to decide to derail it. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about what's the solution to that, right? The people who showed up there still get to go vote, cast one vote each, just like the rest of us. We don't live in a country where you forfeit your participation in our democracy by even by attacking it. I mean, the people who get convicted and stuff like that is a little different, but most of the people who were there, they'll vote again. And so, what is the way that we can actually live together in this country? What's the way to bridge a gap that has gotten so wide that some people have decided they're not willing to participate in the way that the rest of us do anymore? And if it's not the things we're talking about, which is understanding more about where people come from, elevating fact and truth in order to have actual exchanges, meaningful exchanges, if it's not, setting reasonable ground rules for the engagements, right? Accepting the idea that that you can lose, right? Accepting the idea that, look, elections go one way or they go another, and that doesn't mean you were right or wrong to vote the way you did. It just means more people voted either with you or against you. All of these concepts, I think, are undergirded by the idea of being able to have an exchange with people you just don't agree with. And I'm not saying that we should be light on the people who did that, or we ought not pursue that to every end to make sure it doesn't happen again. But you still are left with the question, then what, right? These are not people who will not count. We don't live in a country that does that. So how do we pull them back in to the process in a way that's far more productive than what they did?
So, as we sort of wind down tonight, I wonder, you guys have been doing this, you've been speaking to thousands of people over the past couple of years. We've seen, so many big things happen that have impacted our ability to be civil or not. How are you both feeling about the future of our democracy? Have you talked about that? Do you have any consensus about it? Where do you stand now?
Well, I feel a little better about it knowing there's groups like the one we're talking to tonight out there also shouting about that. We're not in a wilderness by any means. I do think it's something we have to pay attention to. I don't know that this is going to fix itself or naturally evolve to a better place. We've certainly been through division in this country before. We've been through existential divisions in this country before. And, I don't know that we've reached that point yet, but we could easily get there. I believe in the American people. I believe in the goodness of the American people. I think we'll get through this. I think the younger generations are much better at living together and sort of loving across all lines than maybe my generation was, or even Steve. So I got great faith in the young people of this country. I think they're good people and their heart's in the right place. But maybe did we get all of the questions? You think did we touch in some way or another on all the questions we've had?
Yeah, most of them, yeah. Stephen, do you want to chime in about the future of our democracy?
Yeah, I mean, I do think, I mean, I'm a big student of history, and I mean, if you look back, I mean, there've been lots of points where it seemed like, things were just going to come apart. I mean, obviously the most significant being, the war that was fought to end slavery in this nation. I mean, that's a low point for sure. And I don't think this is a point in time that stands, apart from those other points. We would hope, I think, that we don't get to the point of 1860 again. I don't think we're close to something like that. I do think the republic is changing, and the demographic change that's happening in this country is accelerating, and its influence is accelerating. And I guess my worry is that the backlash to that becomes more intense, and that we end up with more of the kinds of things that we saw on January 6th last year, for instance. But I don't think the republic is going to go away. I don't think it's going anywhere. I don't think it doesn't survive. I think it's a period of time where we're going to see a lot of close-in conflict and strife, and it's all the more reason you need organizations like the one that we're talking with tonight, or institutions like the Civility Project, to elevate that idea that, okay, we do have really important, intense disagreements, but we got to live together. I mean, it sounds like a cliche, I think, but where are we all going? I don't think anybody's leaving. I don't think any state or group of states would be better off without the rest of them. I don't think there's practical ways for that to work. So we got to live together, and we got to figure that out. And you can't do it without civil means to prosecute our differences, as opposed to uncivil.
Yeah, I think I would say, though, we've got to be intentional about fixing this, and we've got to address this rise of partisanship in this nation, and the poisonous partisanship and the determination of the political parties to keep us divided, because it profits them and benefits them. And we've got to get to a point where we see our political system again as working for the betterment of the people, and not simply as a means for one group of people to gain power or the other. We have been lurching for a couple of decades or more now from one extreme to the other in this country. Every 4 or 8 years, Democrats take power, and then Republicans take power, and they try to completely undo what the other has done. And so there is no middle. There's no place. It's all or nothing. Democrats right now have a very narrow control over Congress, and you would think that they controlled 60-70% of the place. And I think these rules that have empowered majoritarianism in Congress, we need to think about that. There was some benefit in requiring 60 votes in the Senate. It's sort of protected against the passions of majoritarianism. But we've got to address the things that are um, that are dividing us, the systems that are dividing us, and be willing to consider different ways of electing our leaders, and different different approaches. We need to experiment a little and see if we can break the duopoly these two parties have on us and force them to work together a little bit.
So
better.
as we head toward the end, we have two questions that I think we haven't answered. One is asking you guys to give some examples of where you may have started on opposite sides, but found some areas of agreement that you didn't expect to have in the details. And the other question that's been coming again and again is, how do we bring people from both sides to the conversations? And so I guess with Braver Angels, they're not getting as many reds as they're getting blues. And so how do we inspire people from all sides to come to the table to have the conversations?
We used whiskey. I don't know if that'd work in Arizona.
Works pretty good. It's hard to, we get that question a lot. Is there some issue that we end up on the same side of, that we start on opposite sides? I don't really think there is.
Well, we've worked, maybe a better way to answer it, we've worked together on problems.
Yeah.
We most recently worked together on that school board issue where they were fixing to kill each other out there. In the past, I remember the time where we worked together to try to come up with a solution. We had a really terrible situation in Detroit over the 4th of July fireworks, and you wouldn't think that would be so controversial, but this is a very, at that time it was a 90-some% Black city, and we had a situation where the police department was rounding up in paddy wagons young Black kids who came downtown and either got separated from their parents or came down unaccompanied, and putting them in paddy wagons and hauling them off by the hundreds. And Steve and I brought together the city council, the police chief, the business community, and we worked through that. These were people who started out very much on opposite sides of the issue, and it was just a horrible situation, from my view. And we managed to get that done. I mean, we both have very, very similar thoughts on criminal justice reform and have advocated similar positions, and it's helped move the issue when two people from distinct different viewpoints can come together. The same thing happened during, when Detroit was starting its big redevelopment push, and you had a lot of folks from all over the place interested in coming into Detroit and opening business and stuff. And both Steve and I at about the same time noticed that most of the new activity was from white folks, not from people who had lived and worked in Detroit. We started asking questions about that, and it changed some of the practices. I mean, one time I remember we were at the TV station, and one of the economic groups brought in 50 future Detroit leaders, and 49 of them were white. We're thinking, what on earth here? Are people just clueless? And in their enthusiasm for this new birth of activity in Detroit, they were sort of blind to some of the things they should have seen. And we both wrote extensively about it. And I think we reached different audiences. And so we have worked together on some pretty significant issues.
All right. Well, I think we have exhausted our questions. Do you guys want to finish with any last thoughts before we end our session tonight?
I just say thank you to this group for doing what they're doing, and it's so exciting to learn about it. I'd hope you'd keep us posted on your activity and how it's going there.
Absolutely. I will put my email in the chat. If you guys have other groups that you'd like us to speak to, please reach out to me. I'm happy to start coordinating that. And we would love to keep in touch about all of the wonderful work that you're doing as well. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us for the Civility Project.
Thanks, Lynn. Thanks, everybody.